Hi, I'm Arthur, and it's time for me to forsake my sense of purpose and do something that every YouTuber who lacks self-respect and, Wendigoon does at some point in their life, an iceberg video. And for those who don't poke your head outside of the 40k community that often, an iceberg meme style video is basically covering topics from most known to most obscure, starting at the top in the clear skies with the most basic information. So I thought it might be fun to do this myself, make it a cute little series for a little bit and see if you guys like it. Give some interesting anecdotes of information that I know and then learn some stuff along the way. I found this monstrosity a whiles back. I honestly think it fits the definition of an iceberg video, because there is so much on this that I don't even know by looking at the name of where to start with it. So we're gonna divide it up by layer. Here we go, part 1. Before we actually get into the iceberg, just a quick word from a rather appropriate sponsor. Back at it again. Starforged is sponsoring this video, and I couldn't pass them up. So, what Warhammer goodie are we discussing today? This beauty right here, the gold-plated Aquila necklace. If you're a 40k fan by any stretch of the imagination, the Aquila is a symbol that you know very well. It's a symbol of mankind. It's the symbol of more or less the entirety of 40k as a whole. It's such an aesthetic-looking necklace too, and it's a bit of a status symbol, I will admit. I think pulling up to a tournament and whipping this bad boy out to pray to the God Emperor that you don't fail a 9-inch charge is gonna be pretty cool to all your nerd friends. So, using my link in the description, you'll get 8% off of your order of the gold-plated Aquila necklace. It's just another good product from Starforged that I wholeheartedly endorse. Layer 1, clear skies ahead. This layer is basically just the stuff you see on the shelves of the hobby store and never look up anything further, but nonetheless, let's break everything down. Space Marines. Space Marines are the most well-known portion of the 40k fanbase. They are super augmented humans that from their early teens are introduced to organs and various gene therapies that allow them to grow into an 8-foot-tall-ish and impossibly strong super soldier. They have numerous different chapters, each of different colors to represent different mentalities, and yeah, it's pretty much basic shit. Speaking of basic, the Ultramarines are the most well-known chapter in the entirety of the setting. They are probably the most well-known entity in 40k as a whole, as they are the poster child of the Space Marines, and the Space Marines are the poster child of 40k. But in short, the Ultramarines are the generalist Space Marine. Hailing from a crag as their home world, they are blue and kind and just more or less Boy Scouts as a whole. The Necron are the oldest threats in the universe. Basically, millions of years ago, the Necron tier were a race that transferred their souls into robot bodies, creating the Necron. They were more or less tricked into doing so by ancient material gods that promised they would help them get revenge on the gods that created the Necron tier and cursed them to a pretty shitty lifestyle, if you ask me. In the end, this led to the war in heaven, which we will likely discuss later, but due to the Necron more or less winning the war in heaven, they went to sleep in these massive tomb worlds, and are now only just waking up millions of years later to reclaim a galaxy that doesn't have gods that they have to worry about in it. Orcs are one of the first factions introduced in the 40k setting alongside Space Marines in the 80s. They are mean, they are green, and they are what you would get if you took every fantasy trope of orcs and pumped it up to 11. They have guns that shouldn't really work, but they do. They have magical colors and are honestly really goofy, but still intimidating as fuck. They have some of the most advanced tech in the universe, but none of it makes sense. Even to them, really. They have a culture based around war and amass in massive groups of boys to go fight in these wars. Fun fact, they are actually mushrooms that upon death will slowly explode into spores that find little dark crevices to burrow down into and create more orcs and even goblins. Fucking elves in space. What, did you want more? Fine, I guess. The Eldar are based off of elven tropes, mostly established in the Warhammer fantasy setting that were propagated for the 40k setting. Essentially, they are alongside Orcs and Space Marines as one of the original factions from the 80s original printing of Rogue Trader and early editions of Warhammer 40k, which you can still see that they share a lot of weaponry that the Imperium has, power weapons, chain weapons, etc. Most Eldar reside in spaceships called craft worlds, which I will likely cover on this iceberg myself at some point, but that's for later. The youngest race of all the sentient presences in the universe, but still a threat to some degree. They are a race of collectivist aliens that seek to have an idea of the greater good, basically equal opportunity living for all species unless you're an ethereal. The central race of the Tau Empire is the Tau, which are blue cow people, and their side ancillary races that work with them, like the Kroot, the Vespid, and sometimes just humans who defect from the Imperium. The thing to know about the Tau to understand them is that they have incredibly advanced technology, like stable plasma weapons, and they tend to use mech suits to fight most of the time unless you're counting the ancillaries. Unironically, the best proof that your average Warhammer fan has the worst sense of humor of every fandom out there, it's a meme that has long since been established to essentially shout the word heresy at things that you either disagree with or is a meme in the community. Oh, you play Tau? Heresy. Oh, you like playing any Chaos God army? Well, you're just a filthy heretic anyway. And so on and so forth. It's kind of trite. I don't think I've ever really laughed at the joke inside the context of Warhammer, but there you go. Chaos is a psychic force that is powered by the unconscious emotions of all sentient beings, though it is powered more by how strong each emotion is. So races with more muted emotions tend to not really feed into chaos as much as others. With enough strong emotions, it forms into warp entities created from these emotions. The strongest four of these emotions are divided into the four major categories of the chaos pantheon, which is anger, despair, want, and ambition. Essentially, giant alien hyperactive bug monsters, because major alien threats in most sci-fi media at the time of their inception were either an alien race of bugs or an alien race of lizards. So why not mix the two together and see what you can get? They are a super invasive species that steals biological mass to create new species to fight for them. They invade planets for biomass and tend to be one of the more destructive forces in the galaxy, as although they do probably have a semi-sentient hive mind, they do not reason or even communicate with anything or anyone else. The secret police of the Imperium of Mankind, they are essentially people with especially unlimited restraint for punishment, and are sent on missions in order to protect the Imperium and prevent disasters, though there is a common trope where, due to the level of authority, if they fall to corruption, they usually end up causing impossible amounts of damage on the way out. The actual backbone of the military structure of the Imperium of Mankind. The Imperial Guard are essentially an army of either drafted, conscripted, or volunteered soldiers who train to become the bulwark against most enemy threats. See, they are divided into millions, if not billions, of different Guard regiments that each have their own specialist tactics. Being mostly just humans with a decent rifle and flak armor, they often get overlooked as being weak, but when you have trillions in one single army, then, well, it's kind of hard to ignore 1,000 shiny bolts of laser flying directly towards you at light speed. Centered initially on Mars, the Adeptus Mechanicus, or the Cult Mechanicus, is a hyper-religious organization that, although is a part of the Imperium, does not share the same faith for the most part. They worship an entity that is referred to as the Omnissiah, or the Machine God. They have an intense reverence for all things machine and technology, though this does not extend to the invention of new technology, as it usually is considered heresy to create new pieces of machine or expand upon other machines. They are more fixated on remaking and fixing old machines to be at peak efficiency as to what they were now, so that it's usable today. They also look really fucking cool. Initially a small convent of rigorously trained battle nuns, they were an aggressively zealous bunch that eventually proliferated throughout the majority of the Imperium, being the chamber militant of the Order Hereticus. They are clad in power armor, though are not genetically enhanced like Space Marines. Though there is implications in some books that for some reason they are selectively bred for good genetics for physically active bodies, so they may as well be eugenics babies at this point. They are equipped with very much the same level of offensive equipment that Space Marines are, but they are still human. So they make up for it with their faith and zealous devotion in order to be more than just a slightly better guardsman. Speaking of slightly better guardsmen, probably the most well-known or second most well-known regiment of guardsmen are the Death Corps of Krieg, which are a very different regiment compared to the others. They have intense focuses on siege and trench warfare, but they also have this idea known as the death cults, where a normal guardsman would be afraid to fight and die. Each and every Kriegsman desperately wants to die in order to remove a stain on the honor of their planet, which happened thousands of years ago. Essentially, they did a fucky-wucky in the Horus Heresy, but yeah, they will fight until they die unless ordered to do otherwise, and even then, sometimes they'll still die. Dystopian as fuck. Basically, imagine an ultra-dystopian factory where you had to live in said factory and work there in order to even survive. Now imagine the factory is about the size of North America, and that's a Hive City. Essentially structured similar to that of an anthill, where there are deep levels of multi-connecting tunnels that have civilizations into them, and they become more and more packed and cramped the further into the ground you go and the further deep you go. Essentially, the rich and the nobles are on top, where the air is mostly clean, but the deeper you go, the poorer and more lawless it gets. It's super bleak, as they can have populations in one city that dwarf the population of our fucking planet. Layer 2. The theme of this specific layer, more or less, is information people who just play the tabletop would know. It's stuff the casual person at a glance wouldn't immediately know by looking at the setting, but if you play the 40k wargame and you've been playing for a little while and have friends who do, you probably are going to know about all of these, if not most of them. But let's break it down, shall we? The Golden Throne is a bit of a mysterious sort. Essentially, it's this massive golden chair that was created during the Dark Age of technology, so not many people know what it is. But it's essentially the only thing keeping the Emperor of Mankind alive, sort of. He is seated on the throne, where it is preserving his life essence as well as his physical body, as best as humanly possible. The throne itself is slowly failing. Its process is becoming slower and less efficient, so there is a bit of a doomsday in the making there if the throne fails. Then, mayhaps the Emperor will die and all of humanity will be completely fucked. The Emperor of Mankind, when he began to reclaim the universe under the dominion of the Imperium of Mankind, was very much stretched thin, so he had an idea. This idea was to essentially make slightly weaker clone children of himself with his talents of genetic recombination and the abilities of another Psyker named Erda. He made 20 of these fuckers, and each one had a bit of a different speciality, unless you believe in Primarch Redundancy Theory. Each one's genetic code was also used to make one of the 20 legions of Space Marines, which is where the gene seed for each legion comes from. Vanguard organisms of the Tyranids, known as gene stealers, are usually infested into small civilizations, in which they will likely infect a new person with genetic code that makes them want to have a child immediately. That child comes out incredibly fucked up looking, and is thus forcibly hidden in the mines. Every successive generation of child that comes after is more and more human-like until you hit the 4th generation, when they look almost entirely human. These individuals tend to have a very confused opinion opinion of the Imperium, thinking that it is an intolerable tyrannical regime, which they are correct about, but they also believe their bug gods will show up one day and save them. When it's actually time for them to meet their bug gods, it's just the Tyranids prepping them to destabilize the infrastructure of their home planet and then, like, eat them. Weird. How they have to ask this one before they go into the Horus heresy, but I get it. Basically, of the original 20 Primarchs, there were 18 that weren't censored for the Imperium. Of the 18, 9 of which sided with the Emperor during a massive civil war, and 9 sided with his favorite son, Horus Lupercal. These are the 9 traitor legions, and each one, still to this day, is kind of an enemy to the Imperium. We think. The Sea of Souls, the space between space. It's a flowing immaterial realm made up of Psyche hoo-ha that is kind of the key feature to the setting. Think of it as a bit of a magical realm that most people don't really understand. There are entities in the warp made up of pure emotional energy, and because of this, people tend to be weirded out by it. Though, one important note to make is that the warp is in fact separate from chaos. Though chaos exists in the warp, it's just its own small section of the warp. Oh wow, this is gonna be a bit tough, but basically the Katan, or as I say the Citan, because Katan is a board game, were a race of gods that existed a long ass time ago that were known for being cunts. Now, you shouldn't compare them to the gods of the Immaterium, like Khorne, Tzeentch, and so on, because the Katan represent material concepts such as life and death, things that can be tangibly witnessed as a phenomena. Now, most of them have been shattered into smaller fragments that contain pieces of their old power, usually used to power Necron technology, because we found out in the lore, if you destroy a Katan completely, it removes a key feature of the universe, which is not a good thing and usually has wacky consequences. A living meme, and one of the funniest Necron to ever live. Being a member of the Nihilak dynasty, Transient the Infinite is known to be a bit of an oddity. See, most Necron need a hobby in order to sustain their sense of self. Gotta preserve your sanity and all that. Transient has this obsession with creating museums filled with rare things. Now, what are these things? Literally anything. Moments in time, ancient aliens thought to be extinct. He owns a perfect clone of pre-corruption Fulgrim, and maybe owns a different Primarch as well. Transient is also referred to as the Infinite because he has millions of copy bodies that inhabit the universe, so if one of them dies that has his consciousness in it, his consciousness just transfers into one of the other copies. Thus, infinite. Gillan, being one of the 20 Primarchs and one of the 9 that stayed loyal, was thought to be dead or at least dying as he was stabbed in the throat by a warp-poisoned sword by his twink brother, who was also a daemon. His return was because of a mixture of various circumstances involving the intervention of death-obsessed Ynnari, Grey Knights, and just all in all the opening of a massive warp rift known as the Cicatrix Maledictum. He's now back and is declared the Archregent of the Imperium, currently leading them into a new and hopefully brighter era, but also probably incredibly depressed. 1 in a million people are born Psykers. What does this mean? Well, it means they have an inherent connection to the warp that is stronger than other people. It means they can call upon warp energies manifested by emotion. This is both dangerous and effective, but generally speaking, most Psykers are minor. But the abilities they can manifest range from simple shit like being able to understand and comprehend complex languages without having learned them, all the way to full-blown pyrokinesis and exploding people with your mind. One of the most interesting feral worlds out there, Katchan, or sometimes referred to as Katchan, is a world known for producing some of the most resilient and dangerous guardsmen in the universe. Essentially, they were created a long-ass time ago to be a guardsman regiment based off of the old 80s action hero characters. All of the planet's residents are muscle-bound guerrilla fighters that obviously have to wear bright red bandanas around the top of their head, and all have looks that are similar to characters like Arnold Schwarzenegger in Commando, Sylvester Stallone in Rambo, and I'm pretty sure there's one that's related to Ripley from the Alien series, which is pretty cool, but if you look further into it, every single major character that shows up in 80s action movies that you could name off the top of your head probably has representation. The personal guard of the Emperor of Mankind, created in very much a different process to that of the Space Marines. The Custodians are built up by being modified on a genetic level through gene therapies rather than through brute force implantation of randomly generated organs. This takes a lot more time, effort, and resources than that of a Space Marine, but the end result is that one Custodian is the combat equivalent of like somewhere between 10 and 100 Space Marines, if that. They are probably the greatest soldiers to ever come out of the Imperium, and some have been compared to a Primarch in terms of combat effectiveness. One of the bigger hypocrisies of the Imperium of Mankind is that they refuse to accept any form of mutation in their ranks, and that is kind of a half-lie, because the Imperium of Mankind doesn't like mutants unless they're useful. Stable mutations that occur enough are referred to as abhumans. A lot of these abhumans are included in the Imperial Guard, such as Ogrins, the Ratling, and the Felinid, but there are a few strains of abhuman that are so far removed from baseline that they are considered no longer part of humanity and are disgraced, like the Beastmen, or some that are more or less forgotten as a part of humanity and are so far removed that they are considered an alien species and the records don't even state the connection anymore, such as the Leagues of Votan, aka the Squats. The Dark Eldar, also known as the Drukhari, are the members of the Eldar race that survived Slaanesh's uprising by hiding out in the Webway. The Webway cities that they held out in were more or less safe and meant they didn't need to cut off completely from their debased behavior. Now, they have developed a culture around torture, as when something around them is feeling pain, they stave off the aging process and even become slightly stronger for a short period of time. So that basically means they spend most of their days kidnapping and torturing the majority of the people they find, just to keep themselves from being eaten by a hedonism god. And that was part 1 done and dusted. I'm looking to do 2 layers of this per video, and you'll understand once we get to the next part, because the layers get pretty dense. For the first 2, there was about 12 different things to discuss per layer, but on the next one it goes to 15, and then after that it goes to like 18. I hope you all enjoyed. Let me know what you think of this iceberg in the comments, and if there are any moments you think are your favorite. Also, remember to like and subscribe, as it shows me that you like this style of content. And special thanks to my channel members for supporting me, and if you want to support me as well as gain access to additional content, then become a channel member today. Thanks again for watching, and next is gonna be fucking weird.